And I will say that Golda Meir is definitely the most complicated person I will
Really?
probably ever discuss. I don't know who else is on the options, but I've given talks about the Jewish Nobel. I gave a whole series about Jewish Nobel Prize winners, different types of people, but there's really no one as complicated as Golda Meir. And before I even begin, I'll say why Golda Meir is so complicated. Two reasons. Number one, there are many, many, many episodes in her life that you can see her either as the most righteous, altruistic, good person who brought about amazing salvation, or there are others who argue that it was that she brought about a catastrophe. And there's just a lot of those. There's a lot of parts in her life that are really subject to interpretation. Either it was I mean, the most obvious one is the Yom Kippur War, but there's just so many episodes in her life where she's either very, very, very righteous, or she's someone that a lot of people hold something against her. That's one complication. The other complication is the gap between the way Golda Meir is observed in the United States and the diaspora, and the Golda Meir that's seen in Israel. There's a huge disparity between, in the 1970s, Golda Meir was the most admired woman in the United States, just to give you a perspective. And that's not necessarily the same feeling that people in Israel had at the time. Again, of course, the Yom Kippur War complicates her legacy most, but there's a lot to learn from her, a lot of history, and we're gonna more than I'm gonna show her life story, I'm gonna speak about the way different people see her. So first of all, Golda Meir is born in 1898 in Kiev, which at the time
Hmm.
Russia. No one really sees it as Ukraine at the time, but the people are Ukrainian. She's born to a traditional family. Her grandfather is what you call a Cantonist. If those of you have heard of Cantonists, people who were kidnapped as children into the Russian Tsar's army at the age of 10, had to serve for 30 years and remained Jewish. So her grandfather remained Jewish despite being in the Tsar's army under horrific conditions. And the family had kosher food, ate around the table on Shabbat holidays. She used to say it wasn't a very religious family, but it was in many other ways. She was born to a family that had 8 children, 5 of whom ended up dying. And so that is very much
Wow.
the childhood she had as someone who grew up in such a very poor family, and also the fact that so many of her sisters were sick and died is definitely something that's going to shape her in terms of her commitment to social welfare and taking care of the weak and the poor. So that's something that becomes very much a part of her life. Once we're going to see, but once her family left Europe, almost everyone who stayed behind remained there and died in the Holocaust. In her childhood, there were many, many pogroms. I believe there's a scene in the movie about her, Golda, where she says, as a little girl, I remember my father boarding up the windows, the door, because the Cossacks were coming to make a pogrom, and I will not be doing that today. I will not be boarding up Israel. I won't be hiding anywhere. And that's very much true, because she did grow up in the wake of pogroms, and many, many tens of thousands of Jews were killed in these pogroms. And so she grows up in the wake of pogroms, poverty, and the communist revolution. Her sister is an ardent Zionist and a communist. And all that is the childhood she grows up in. One day, between all the pogroms and the poverty, her father decides, like millions of other Jews in Eastern Europe, time to go to America. He goes to America and he works for 3 years. In 1903, he leaves the family when she's just 5 years old. He goes for 3 years. He makes enough money to bring them over, and he brings them to Milwaukee. Now, to this day, by the way, in Milwaukee, there's a public school named the Golda Meir Public School. And that's because she
Hmm.
became such a legend. And she grew up in Milwaukee. She graduated as valedictorian at the age of 14, and her parents did not want to let her go to high school. Her father used to say, "No men like smart women," You're not going to find a husband if you go to high school. She was very committed to education, but he said, no, you can't go to high school. By the way, that's the formal version, that the reason she runs away from home, which she does, is because her parents wouldn't let her go to high school. There is, upon further inspection, also reason to believe that her parents got her engaged to a man twice her age. Sort of like in the Fiddler on the Roof, they find a rich guy, and rich, by the way, in those days means that you're not starving, and she runs away from home. So when she's just 14 years old, Golda runs away from home to her sister's house in Denver, Colorado. So she runs from Milwaukee to Denver and to her sister. Her sister has a huge influence on her. Her sister's home is like a hub for young Zionists, Marxists, communists, all kinds of very ideologically driven people, and also somewhat of revolutionary people who are, in the spirit of that time. And so while she's living at her sister Shayna's home in Denver, she sees all these meetings about Zionism, and she becomes very excited by labor Zionism. She becomes deeply passionate about moving to Israel, also about the labor movement of making sure that people have shelter, many concepts that, some people see as socialist, communist, whatever it may be. She gets very into the whole concept of welfare, caring for the masses, making sure that everyone has their basic needs. Finally, her parents are able to convince her to come back home, and they say, fine, come back home. We won't force you to marry anyone, and you can go to high school, get an education. But in the meantime, she met someone named Morris Meyerson. Now, I'll quickly say that not as controversial, but even the story of her marriage is not a simple story, because she marries a fellow named Morris Meyerson. She meets him in Denver. He is not excited by any of her ideology. He's not a Zionist. He's not into the whole labor thing. He's actually excited by her love of literature, by her love of art, but he is not a Zionist. And they date when she's in Denver, and she tells him she'll marry him on two conditions. Number one, he moves to Israel. Number two, he moves to a kibbutz. Now, uh, her marriage does not end up being a successful one, but the life of Morris Meyerson is really kind of heartbreaking, because he follows her to everywhere, and she does not necessarily reciprocate, and it's just a heartbreaking marriage. Not only that, her children also grow up very much in her absence, and those two things are things she felt guilty about for her whole life. In terms of Morris, her husband Morris, and in terms of being absent for her, when her children are there, or when she's not there for her children. She moves back to Milwaukee. She graduates, and eventually, in 1917, a week after the Balfour Declaration, she decides they're going to move to Israel and live on a kibbutz. Interestingly, Golda is so non-religious at the time that she doesn't even want to have a Jewish wedding. Her mom convinces her to have a Jewish wedding, but she didn't even want to have a Jewish wedding. She marries Morris, and they move to Israel, to kibbutz Merchavia. They have a long journey till they get there, and they arrive in the kibbutz. Now, in those days, living on a kibbutz, exactly like in the stories, was a I shouldn't say a heartbreaking, but a backbreaking journey. You go to a kibbutz, there's malaria. It's not even like the cliches are exaggerated. There's malaria. You have to work your head off. And it's always funny to me. Has anyone been to those little hilltops in Israel, those little yishuvim in the West Bank, stuff like that? Anyone ever been to any of those? Anyone ever been to like those little yishuvim? So it's always funny to me. My brother lives in one of those, and it's always funny to me when I ask people, "Oh, what if I wanted to come live here?" They say, "No, no, 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 no. You need to pass. It's called a va'adat kabbalah, an admissions committee." And believe it or not, it's easier to get into some of the buildings on Fifth Avenue than it is to get to some of these hilltops with trailer parks. And you're like, I don't understand. This is what I need to get in. I mean, it's you guys are living in a trailer park on a hilltop somewhere out there, and it's so hard to get in, but they sometimes are selective. And so Golda and her husband arrive at Kibbutz Merchavia, and they're rejected. Can you imagine being rejected from a kibbutz filled of malaria where you have to work for free and you basically get nothing? It's a socialist commune, and so it's kind of it's ironic. They get rejected because they're married, and the kibbutz is only for single people. Now. Morris Meyerson has a condition for Golda at this point. He says he sees the malaria. He actually gets sick with malaria. He's broken. And he sees the kibbutz. How do they raise children in the kibbutz? Anyone know how they raise children on a kibbutz? Anybody? And back in those days, it didn't last more than I think 2-3 decades. But how did they raise children then?
Communally.
How?
Communally.
Right.
Communally. Sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's called Beit HaYeladim. So Morris Meyerson, who, by the way, didn't even want to come to Israel to begin with, let alone working in malaria-stricken swamps, he tells her, listen, Golda, I love you, but I will not have children with you if they're going to be raised in a Beit Yeladim. I want to raise children in a traditional way, and if you can't do it, we won't do it. Golda, in the meantime, while her husband Morris, for understandable reasons, partially because he had no interest, while he's languishing with malaria and backbreaking work, she is thriving. She becomes an expert on raising chickens. She represents the kibbutz in certain committees. And she describes those 2 years in the kibbutz as the happiest ones of her life, even though they were so difficult and her husband was really suffering. She loved those years. Finally, after 2 years, malaria and God knows what else, Morris tells her, "I'm done. We're not staying here in the kibbutz. Let's move to Jerusalem." You can now end the period of Golda's life that's called the happiest in her life and enter the most miserable period in her life. They move to Jerusalem, and she makes this compromise for Morris. They move to Jerusalem, where he gets a job that he loves, accounting at the Sochnut, and she works really horrifically hard, and they are extremely poor. They have 2 children. It's around this time that all kinds of bad things happen. They have 2 children, and there's just no food. And in order to send her child to daycare, she had to volunteer. Well, not volunteer. This is because she had zero money to pay with. She had to wash the clothing of all the children in the daycare. So that was how she would pay. She worked back-breaking jobs, had no bread, no food, and it's really a time that she hated. It was really very, very much not the type of life that she wanted. And so she's slowly looking for a different job. Here you see how things are going in her marriage, right? In the beginning, she's very happy in the kibbutz. He's miserable. They move to Jerusalem. He's thrilled working as an accountant. She's extremely miserable. And finally, she meets in the Histadrut a fellow named David Remez, founder of the Zionist movement in many ways. And he offers her a job in the Sochnut, the Histadrut. Histadrut is like the labor's union of Israel. It's where all the workers, Histadrut HaOvdim, it's the union of all the workers. And he says, come work in the Histadrut. You're so miserable in Jerusalem. She knows that Morris will not agree, but she still says she'll go. And that is effectively when their marriage is over. They never got divorced in their life, but they didn't really live together ever again after that. She went to Tel Aviv to get a job in the Histadrut. Morris stays in Jerusalem, and that's pretty much the end. She stays married, but she's not married. There's even stuff that's her own business. I'm not going to get into that, but anyhow, between her and Morris, that's pretty much over, and she moves to Tel Aviv.
And he raises the kids?
So it's interesting. That's a very contentious point because she raises the kid, but when the kids and he comes she raises the kids. He comes and sees them on weekends. But then when she starts traveling, representing the Zionist movement, he has to take the kids, and he does not like that. He really he wanted a wife who would raise the children at home, and she says she felt guilty, but she says I was not the type of woman to be held back by that. So that's a bit of an issue. And basically, she raises the kids in Tel Aviv. He visits, but they manage somehow to raise their children, except when she goes to leave the country on her various missions, he takes the kids, and that ends up being a whole lot of time because she starts traveling more and more. Wherever Golda goes, the second she starts working, and not in a chicken coop, but in offices of a large organization, she's very well liked, and she's chosen to represent. She speaks great English. And this is really when she starts touring the world and becoming a powerhouse of representation of the Yishuv. Already in 1928, she's a delegate of the World Women's Zionist Organization to Berlin. And she's starting now to really become a representative of the Histadrut, of the Sochnut, we're going to see later. And this is when her job as a diplomat, an organizer, executive really starts. This is when she starts shining. Now, like I said, Morris, her husband, her ex, whatever you want to call him, opposes her taking on all these jobs because simply speaking, he's then left with the kids, but she doesn't really ask him at any point. And so, yeah, that's the story with her and Morris. It's kind of sad, actually. A spoiler alert: Morris dies in the 1950s one time when he comes to see the apartment to visit her, and it's very symbolic that he has like a heart attack when he goes in to see her again, because really his story with her is a story of love. He follows her to Israel all the way from Denver, even though he's not a Zionist, but it does not end up working out. So it's kind of heartbreaking when you think of what Morris has been through, but you know, she had a lot of things that she wanted to accomplish, and so we'll see what that is. She starts traveling more and more and more all around the world on behalf of the Zionist organizations, whether it's the Histadrut or WITZO, the World Women's Zionist Organization. When her daughter becomes sick, she becomes very sick. She gets a perk to fly with mom to New York, to Beth Israel, and she gets surgery in Beth Israel. But Golda becomes increasingly a representative of the Zionist movement just because she's so persuasive, she's so reliable, and she really rises to every occasion that you send her. We're going to see later there were some men who did not like that, and they were jealous of her, specifically Moshe Sharet, but she continues to shine and to represent the Histadrut. In 1936, she speaks in front of the Peel Commission, and she becomes a really professional representative for the Yishuv, saying we need a state of our own. And she starts pointing out how the number of Arabs in Israel doubled since the Yishuv came in, since Jews started settling the land. And she becomes a really thoughtful spokesperson for why you should have a Jewish state. In 1937, she's chosen to manage the Kupat Cholim of the Histadrut. And it's interesting because in many cases in her life, she's just, there's no one like her, meaning when you want someone who's going to get something done, you choose Golda. So there are times that she's simultaneously managing labor relations, managing Kupat Cholim, and being a foreign spokesperson. It's just, she's indispensable. And in a world that is really dominated by men, everyone eventually concedes that no one is quite like her. No one is able to do things like her. Whenever you need an organization whooped into shape, she's the person. Whenever you need things well managed, she's the person. In 1938, and I'm going to give you an example of another thing that I think is just hard to, this is exactly what I was telling you about Golda. 1938, she represents the Yishuv at the Evian conference in France before the Holocaust, where Germany asks people to asks other countries to take the Jews out of Germany, and everyone refuses. On the one hand, Golda is representing the yishuv with no power. She doesn't have right to speak. And she says, I'm going to read a quote from her. She says, sitting there in that magnificent hall and listening to the delegates of 32 countries rise, each in turn to explain how much they would like to take in substantial numbers of refugees and how unfortunate it was that they couldn't do so, was a terrible experience. So on the one hand, she has to sit there and watch all these countries say that they're not taking the Jews into their countries. On the other hand, here's where it gets complicated. The position of the Yishuv was to discourage other countries from taking the Jews from Nazi Germany because the Yishuv wanted those Jews to make Aliyah. Now, the Yishuv, like many others, didn't dream that if Jews don't get out of Germany, what it means is that they'll be annihilated. But at the same time, it's hard to say that the position of the Yishuv is historically good because they, were against other countries accepting Jewish refugees. So it's just one example of a story in Golda's life that on the one hand, you have huge admiration for her. She went to represent the Jewish people at the Evian conference, asking basically that the Jews from Germany be sent to Palestine. On the other hand, the position of the Yishuv, not necessarily only hers, but the position of the Yishuv is that they not go to other countries, that they come to Israel. So it's a tough one. In the Histadrut, she's an iron woman. She doesn't care about other people's opinions because meaning in a good way. She's not afraid to say what she thinks. And in 1940, she quits her job in the Histadrut because they oppose paying the concept of unemployment. So whenever someone gets benefits, someone else is paying for it. So Golda says we need to have unemployment insurance that we pay workers who can't work, but the other workers say, I'm not paying taxes to pay for those who are not working. And so she quits over that issue. But at the same time, she's appointed as the head of their foreign office. And she's now trying to mediate between the Irgun and the Haganah. I'll tell you, in this case, there's no question that Golda is a righteous one because she advocates for talks that would merge or reconcile the Irgun and the Haganah, and David Ben-Gurion stops her. So in that sense, she's the good person here because she did want to bring together the Haganah and the Irgun. So she does get credit for that. But like I said, Ben-Gurion blocks her. During the time of the Holocaust, here's another difficult issue. Golda was offered to travel abroad and to raise awareness about the Holocaust. Now, on the one hand, I'll tell you that she declined, and that's really heartbreaking to know. On the other hand, part of the reason she was asked to do this is because there were many men who wanted her out. We're going to see later. There's a lot of men who want Golda. They love the way she speaks. They want her out of their ball court because they feel like she's taking away the positions that they want. So again, it's something that she was asked to go to the diaspora to speak about the horrors of the Holocaust. She declined. At the same time, she was being asked to go partially because she was being pushed out, and she did not like being pushed out. So it's a tough one. It's hard to say. She also mediated between the Haganah and the British. So one time when the British decided that they would execute Irgun people, the Irgun kidnapped a few British high-ranking people, a judge, and Golda mediated the release of the British and not executing members of the Irgun. So she was really a person that was able to speak to everyone. Here's again where it gets not complicated, but where she sort of, because she's in the middle, she gets tarnished. She has very good relations with the British, and there are obviously Jews who call her terrible names. They call her a Judenrat because she's very close with the British. On the other hand, she's the one who's able to negotiate with the British. We'll see she did some very good things with that. And so she's a complicated person. Part of being able to speak to everyone is that you compromise your popularity on one side. And that's often the case with Golda. In 1947, she becomes officially the head of the Sochnut's foreign office, and she establishes the Sochnut's, the Jewish agency's recruitment center. Officially, it's a recruitment center for helping with this and that. But the bottom line is this is the groundwork for recruitment centers for the IDF. So Golda establishes the recruitment center for the Sochnut, which would later become the vital body that brings in people to the army. When the British are controlling Israel, there's a lot of Jews that are not allowed in, and they're sent to Cyprus. Golda negotiates, because of her position with the British, Golda negotiates the release of 8,000 babies and children from Cyprus to Israel. And so again, you see, she compromises her standing by being very close with the British. On the other hand, she did get 8,000 babies and children into Israel. This is already famous. I don't remember. Did anyone here watch the movie Golda? Anyone here watch it?
Yeah, but I don't remember it.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's the part there about her meeting Abdullah, but she goes in 1947 and she meets with the king of Jordan, King Abdullah, and she says, "Here's the deal, my friend. First of all, they have a very amicable relationship. Second of all, here's the deal. You guys, you Jordan, can conquer all the Arab parts of Israel that are in the partition plan. And on the other hand, you won't kill any Jews. You won't fight with us." And he agrees. That's the deal Golda makes with Abdullah. We'll see later. Unfortunately, he doesn't keep that up. But it's very relevant today when you talk about people say, "Oh, the Palestinians should have a state." There was no thought of the Palestinians having a state. It was Abdullah thinking of how he can conquer every part that was given to the Arabs. So I don't know how thankful they are for that, because he maybe should have given them an independent state. But that's between Abdullah and the Palestinians. On November 29, when there's a declaration of the official partition plan, the Golda becomes the minister of Jerusalem. Basically, she's in charge of all logistics in Jerusalem, and Israel is becoming increasingly independent. She's in charge of that. Now we're going to come to what is unquestionably, indisputably, Golda's finest hour. Does anyone know what Golda's finest hour is? Really, this is something that there's really nothing to debate here. There's no discussion. There's nothing. There's just absolutely nothing to debate. In 1948, David Ben-Gurion sent someone to fundraise in the United States because, as they say, "Imen kemach en Torah." If there's not going to be any money, how are they going to have any weapons? How are they going to be able to defend themselves? That's a huge failure. The guy comes back with no money, and as a second choice, Golda Meir is sent to the United States to raise money for the upcoming war. She goes and she raises. Does anyone know how much she raised? So she raises in her first trip $25 million, which is the equivalent of 600 and something million dollars today. That's on one trip. And then later that year, she totals over $50 million, which is the equivalent of more than $100 million today. So now you have to think about that. For a country that's struggling for its survival and choking, that fundraising is just a lifesaver for Israel. And so this is really Golda's finest hour. American Jewry. This is where she hits it off. She immediately, when she lands, interviews to the American press, and she's shining. She's in her finest, and she goes from place to place. Actually, she goes with a fellow named Henry Morgenthau. Anyone know that name, Henry Morgenthau?
The bank.
Sorry?
And with the banks.
The banks, yeah, it helps. When you're fundraising, it helps to have the head of I think he was the head of the Treasury, and his father helped craft and fund the New Deal. So it helps when you have the United States Secretary of Treasury walking around with you. Well, former, but still he's walking around with you to raise money. It definitely doesn't hurt. And so she raises this insane amount of money. And Ben-Gurion later said of this fundraising trip of hers, he said there was a Jewish woman who got the money to make the state possible. And it's true, because that amount of money for a community that was so small, there were 600,000 Jews. Most of them were just, Holocaust survivors, refugees. The idea that they would be able to buy airplanes, weapons, tanks is unthinkable. And so really, Imein Kemach and Torah. If it wasn't for Golda raising that money, then that all wouldn't happen. But it also shows you, A, how persuasive she was, B, how beloved she was by American Jews, and C, how just hardworking she was. She just, she went from Florida to Cleveland. She just went all over America and raised money nonstop. So that's a major accomplishment of hers, and I would say that's the most indisputable, uncontroversial thing that in the life of Golda, that she basically raised the money that made the state possible, that made the defense of the state possible. And we'll see later that she had one more fundraising trip that really changed Israel. Next, in 1948, as the war was about to break in the month of May, literally weeks before the war, she says, I want to go visit Abdullah. And Ben Gurion says, no, I don't think you should go visit him. I don't think he's going to keep his promise. He's not gonna abstain from fighting us. So she insists, she goes to visit Abdullah in Jordan, and he says, no, I'm sorry, Golda, actually, I will be fighting against you guys. And she tells him, I'll see you after the war. So she's always very, I guess, optimistic, but yeah, that didn't work. The Abdullah did not keep his promise. He did end up attacking Israel. He felt like he had no choice because the whole Arab world was doing that. He couldn't be the one not to. He didn't want to be the uncool kid. Meanwhile, she comes back. She's one of the 2 women to sign Israel's Declaration of Independence. She's only one of 2 women to do that. And at this point, Moshe Ben Gurion sends her again to raise money, and that's where I told you it totals more than $50 million. I don't know if many people here know who Moshe Sharet is. I don't know much about him
He was
either.
the second prime minister.
Second prime minister. Okay, so he doesn't like Golda. He feels like she's stepping on his toes all the time. He feels like she's always taking away from his deserved glory or God knows what. And he always wants her out. He's always pushing her out. And so Ben Gurion sends her to be the ambassador to Moscow. The very famous picture in the New York Times I'll show later. She becomes Israel's first ambassador to Russia. And there's an interesting thing that happens there. Number one is what do you think Israel's number 1 priority vis-a-vis Russia is at the time in 1948? Remember, Russia is the first country to recognize Israel. What do you think Israel's main diplomatic strategic interest is
For
in
people
Russia?
to come to Russia.
Sorry? What's the interest? If you're Israeli ambassador to Moscow in 1948, what's your number 1 strategic goal? What are you trying to accomplish? What relationships are you trying to build?
See, meet the people.
Sorry, did I hear an answer?
Meet the people.
What you want to meet the people?
No, she
She-
wanted to meet the Russian Jewry there.
Excellent. Yes, that's true. The number 1 interest in the state of Israel from Russia at the time was 3 million Jews. There were 3 million Jews. Ben Gurion is clamoring for people, and they know that they're in a demographic existential threat. And Ben Gurion is looking for Jews to come to Israel. And there's 3 million Jews in Russia. Now, nobody knew. This is something we're not able to understand so much today because there's so much information access today. Like, what do you mean? Check the news, check social media, text your friend, send a WhatsApp message. But actually, Jews around the world had no idea what the state of Soviet Jewry was, because the Soviets told people that all the Jews are very happy, and whoever's not religious, it's because they don't want to be religious. The Soviets were telling people they support the state of Israel because you need Jews to be able to flee capitalism and the anti-Semitism that comes with capitalism. But in the haven of the USSR, there's no hate. Everyone's living in brotherly love. And the Jews there simply have zero interest in Israel because they live in this paradise called the Stalin's Soviet Union. And so people didn't know. And you have to understand that really there was in the early 1900s a major disinterest in Judaism. So it was, if you thought in 1948 that there's not a single Jew in Russia who wants to leave, I don't blame you. because it's possible. Decades of brainwashing, of communist brainwashing. It's possible no Jews there wanted to come to Israel, so they, as ambassadors, needed to feel out what's going on, and this is where the famous New York Times picture comes. On Rosh Hashanah, Golda, even though she was not religious at all, Golda and all the members of the embassy put on their finest clothing and they marched to the synagogue. And the word comes that a Jewish ambassador of an independent Jewish state is coming to Shul. The streets are flooded with officers in the Red Army and citizens. And you see that there's this picture. It's unbelievable. You see that there, you know what, maybe I'll pull up the picture, even though I usually wait with pictures till the end. Maybe I'll pull up that picture and show it to you, because it gives you such a understanding of what it was that she was accomplishing there. Let me just show you this picture. It's like I said, it's a picture in the New York Times, 1948, where here she is, Golda. You can see her there. There's a circle right there. You have to understand that, like, there's so much to unpack in this picture. Jews were not gathering. There was no Jewish life in Russia for decades. Many of these Jews survived the Holocaust. Some of them, you can see, look somewhat religious. And the idea that you have a Jewish ambassador that's coming from the state of Israel just electrified everybody. So there she is on Yom Kippur, when they said inside of the synagogue, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, the street thundered. It was like electricity. Now, here comes the part where it's not her fault, but like I told you, it's not easy with Golda to judge any episode. It looks like this is a great thing. They're meeting. There's a huge interest. You can see her on the other side with the Russian ambassador. But there's actually a sad side to this. Why? Because the Soviets see this and they're like, those Jews, untrustworthy. Look, they're actually not happy that we gave them equality in our Soviet paradise. And this is when Stalin cracks down on Judaism in a really horrible way, all the way from 1948 to 1953, where he dies in the middle of the famous or infamous doctor's trial. But the life for Jews, as bad as it was beforehand, actually becomes much worse in Soviet Russia. So again, this is a part of Golda's life where it's amazing to see what she did. It's amazing to see what she inspired. On the other hand, it's complicated. There's no easy way to look at it, because things did get much worse for Russian Jews after that. But she comes back, and this is the point where Israel that starts waking up to the understanding that there are millions of Jews, and that they want to they Jewish. They want to be part of what's going on. So that's a difficult topic. But she comes back to Israel, and Ben Gurion appoints her as Minister of Labor. And she passes a bunch of laws that are actually fundamental to Israel to this day. Bituach Leumi, she's in charge of Aliyah. She passes laws that benefit people on maternity leave. A lot of good things. She passes a lot of good legislation, helpful legislation. Here we come to a very painful point. And again, there's no easy answer to this. The relationship between Golda Meir and Mizrahi Sephardic Jewry. On the one hand, she was Minister of Aliyah. Many people don't know this, especially I wish more people would know this in the Mizrahi world, because there's so much understandable resentment of Golda. Ben Gurion and others didn't want to let Sephardic Jews come to Israel. They said, when hundreds of thousands of Moroccan Jews wanted to come, Golda convinced him to let them come. Golda said, we've lost our right to be Jews, to be a Jewish state, if we don't take in all these people. Now, you have to understand that this would double Israel's population within 5 years. Imagine the infrastructure you would need, the housing, the jobs. So from 1948 to 1958, Israel more than doubles its population, and Golda is in charge of finding people jobs and moving them in. On the other hand, it's a very painful issue that to this day is a living wound in Israeli society. Why? because there is something called the Ma'abarot. The Ma'abarot are tent camps for Jews, almost exclusively who arrive from Arab countries. And so they live in the Ma'abarot until, Ma'abara means you're there temporarily until it's like the word over, passing on. So until you're going to move into your permanent house, you live in this tent camp. Obviously, the tent camp is a horrible place to live. The job prospects are pretty poor. And there's just a lot of social problems created by this. And so to this day, many Mizrahi Jews are understandably resentful of Golda because they feel like they were not given equal treatment. Many Jews who arrived from Soviet Russia, from Hungary, from, so to speak, Ashkenazi countries were fast-tracked to kibbutzim, to nice neighborhoods, whereas Mizrahi Jews were collectively sent to Ma'abarot. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, and this is where I wish it was, again, more balanced out a bit, Golda goes to the United States and she raises $140 million, which again is an astronomical amount, more than $1 billion, for housing for Jews living in Ma'abarot. She builds the development cities, Dimona, Netivot, Ofakim, Kiryat Shmona. She builds all these places up and she tries to get people out of Ma'abarot. Out of the more than 500,000 Jews that lived in Ma'abarot, by the time she leaves office, there were only about 50,000. So it's a complicated legacy. She's seen by many Mizrahi Jews as a form of systemic discrimination, which is, I would say, pretty true. On the other hand, she's the one who advocated for taking Mizrahi Jews into Israel. She's the one who raised the money to build more than 30,000 apartments. And so, you know, it's not an easy topic. It's actually a difficult one. We'll see when she becomes prime minister. It becomes even more painful as these social problems are exacerbated. I got here again the exact number. There were 686,000 Jews who lived in Ma'abarot over her time. She always tried to get them out to cities, get them benefits, jobs, etc. But when she left, there were 55,000. Again, she's righteous for the good things she did, but it's a complicated legacy. Anyhow, that's a tough thing. Another issue that's complicated for everyone is the issue of the reparations from Germany, and so that's a difficult issue as well. One more thing, Golda sees the isolation, the diplomatic isolation of Israel. She becomes, in 1957, Minister of Labor, and she forms relations with third world countries, countries in Africa, and Israel helps these countries a ton. She forms agricultural partnerships, she helps them, and she feels very, very betrayed because Israel does a huge amount for many African countries, but in time of war, all those countries side against Israel, and so she feels very disappointed and betrayed. But it's just important to note that the partnerships, even you know, you think about Operation Entebbe. How do you think Israel had all of the architectural maps of the Entebbe airport? It's because Israel helped build it. And so Golda is the one who really forms a ton of relationships with many countries in Africa, and later she feels like betrayed. She also forms relationships with Iran, Turkey, Ethiopia, and she's really extraordinary in that sense. In 1966, she's diagnosed, this part you do see in the movie, with lymphoma, blood cancer, and she keeps this a secret. And so she's sort of having a double life. On the one hand, she gets cancer treatments. On the other hand, she doesn't tell the world. In 1969, she is the head of Mapai, the Labor Party, well, not exactly labor, but she wins 56 seats in the Knesset. That's the most one party ever won in the Knesset, 56 seats in 1969. And she starts presiding over the Aliyah of Russian Jews. Again, this is when her tensions with Mizrahi Jews get serious. There's an organization in Israel called the Black Panthers. It's named for Black Panthers in America. It's Moroccan Jews who feel disenfranchised, discriminated against, and they start riots in Jerusalem. Credit to Golda Meir, she sits down and meets with them. She meets with them, she hears them out. Unfortunately, she later says to one person after the meeting, they were not very nice people. That becomes public, and there's even a street in Jerusalem named "Hem anashim lo nechmadim," which means they are not nice people, because they saw it as not just a statement to the Black Panthers, but the way they said she saw all Mizrahi Jews. It's a sore point in her life. Although, like I said, she did do a huge amount of things to help Mizrahi Jews. She was a very hawkish person. She actually, many people don't know this, she supported the establishment of settlements in Hebron, in Gaza, and in the Sinai Peninsula. So she's a type of creature that does not exist today in Israel politically. Why? Because she was hardcore, diehard socialist far left. But when it came to Israel's security, relations with Palestinians, you would put her today on Israel's far right, right? How many Israeli politicians are now supporting settlements in Sinai, in Gaza? So she's a mix that you don't see today. Interestingly, I forgot to mention a great story. There was a communist writer in Russia, a pro-Soviet, pro-Stalin writer named Ilya Ehrenberg. And when she comes to Russia, they introduce her to him. Golda refuses to speak in Russian, and Ehrenberg refuses to speak in Yiddish. So you have a problem. She says, I can't speak Russian. He tells her, how do you not have gratitude to your own mother, Russia? And so that's just an interesting meeting. She says, maybe we'll speak in English. And he says, I hate Jews that were born in Mother Russia and don't speak Russian. And she says, I pity Jews who don't speak Hebrew or Yiddish. So that's how that meeting went. If you ever have a bad meeting, you should know. All right. She is prime minister, and here comes probably the most difficult question to this point in her history, where there's basically the Yom Kippur War breaks out. She's very close with the American administration, and many fault her because the buck stops here. She was prime minister. How could Israel get attacked? Why didn't she order a preemptive strike? She did really very much want to order enlistment Erev Yom Kippur, but she didn't, and that's the part that ate her up most because she was that close. On the other hand, the head of Israel's intelligence and chief of staff, everyone told her there's no war coming. So it really speaks to the heart of many situations where she is a woman in a place full of men, and she feels like sometimes they're not fully consulting her, or she doesn't have enough independence. Either way, she's blamed. There's many protests after the Yom Kippur War. And eventually, she faces a national investigation committee, and she resigns eventually. Just one last point on a bit of a tragic and comedic point. Does anyone know Israel's Eretz Nehederet comedy skit? It's like the Israeli SNL. Anyone ever know that? So shortly after October 7th, they have a skit where Netanyahu is sitting in his office, and suddenly he's like shocked to see someone near him. He looks up and he sees Golda Meir smoking. And he's like frightened because she's dead. And he says to her, "What are you doing here?" And Golda tells him, "I just came here to tell you thank you." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And she says, and then it goes on, the differences between October 7th and the Yom Kippur War. And she says, no one makes me look good like you have, because in a way it's true, because right after the Yom Kippur War does break out, Golda does do everything right. She manages the relations with America right. She has the Operation Nickel Brass that Nixon does, bringing in insane amounts of tanks. She visits the sick. The Yom Kippur War, which was seen as Israel's greatest failure before October 7th, was actually a smashing victory. Within 2 weeks, the Israeli army crushed the Egyptian army, which was Soviet armed and funded. It crushed the Syrians, and it took many thousands of Egyptian soldiers hostage. Israel was caught in surprise. It wasn't a good thing, but the Yom Kippur War is unquestionably an Israeli victory, and Golda presided over that. So that's a complicated legacy. Also, in terms of feminism and what women thought of her, there are many feminists who are critical of her. In the same way, people are critical of Margaret Thatcher. saying that, oh, as a woman, you should have been more supportive of women. On the other hand, Margaret Thatcher always thought that she was the one who can do it, but other women couldn't. Golda Meir specifically also criticized the feminist movement, and so it's like a lot of people. I would say that the best comparison is Margaret Thatcher, where you have someone who rose to extraordinary heights in a world that was against the odds, but many women felt like she didn't support them enough, and so that's I think another point. That's the story of Golda. I'm gonna quickly show a slideshow with some of the story of her life. I know I could have spoken about this for much longer, but it's a huge life. There are many books about her, and the reason movies, because there's just so much. There's so much in her life. She has a public service record of many, many decades. So this is Golda as a little girl, as a young woman. You can see that this is Golda. This is a statue of hers back in Milwaukee. This is on the left. You see Golda with her sister Shayna. She lived by her sister in Denver. This is also Golda as a young woman. This is her working on a kibbutz. The 2 happiest years of her life, she called this. And this is Golda speaking as a young person. You can see she's the only woman in the room often. This is very interesting headline from when she came to visit. This is her visit to America fundraising. Golda Meir says Israel must win or die. So she says declares Palestine Jews must have $75 million between now and August. So it's a very high bar, but she actually almost got it. You see here, UJ requests cash. St. Louis sends $600,000, and that's many millions of dollars just from St. Louis. So this is definitely her finest hour and her unquestionable victory, where she really is able to rally American Jews to become more Zionists and also to bring that money in. You can see here Golda signing the Declaration of Independence. She's one of 2 women who do that. Near her is Moshe Sharet, who's kind of always trying to sideline her. And here you see again, she's the only woman in a room full of men. Interestingly, the only parties that ever objected to her being a minister or a woman or a prime minister because she was a woman is you can see him here, the Rabbi Levine, the ultra-Orthodox member. He said you can't have her there, but obviously nobody really thought that was a problem. This is her speaking at Yeshiva University, if we have any YU alum that want to be excited by this. But really, American Jewry is where she resonated most. That's Golda at Yeshiva University. And if anyone has any questions or comments or anything about what we just said, you are welcome to ask either in the chat or in person.
Who is the other
great woman.
female signer?
She accomplished a lot. The aliyah of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jews goes to her credit. And there's many things that you give her credit. There's many things that are just complicated, such as the Yom Kippur War, her relationship with Mizrahi Jews. And she was, she did a lot. She's one of the founding mothers of Israel. And for that, we're very thankful to her.
Who is the other female signer?
All right. I see we have no
Rabbi.
questions.
Rabbi,
Oh, we do have a question. Yeah.
who is the other female signature on the declaration?
I don't remember. I don't remember, but I can find that out. I don't remember who else signed it. But she was one of the 2 people to sign it. It happens to be she got it by chance because that was one of the busiest years of her life. She was going between the United States, Israel, and Moscow. So the fact that she happened to have been there at the time is of great fortune. It worked out. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Good night. Thank you.